Welcome to Geekstorians, the show where we track the power-ups, glitches, and unexpected respawns that shaped modern geek culture. I'm Dave from Geektown, and today we're heading back to a world of bright pixels, battered joysticks, and the moment electronic entertainment stopped being a novelty and started becoming a community. This is Joystick Nation. Tokyo, 1978. Neon buzzing like it's trying to signal passing aircraft. Pavement still wet. A thin ribbon of cigarette smoke drifting out of a cramped arcade that frankly looks like the sort of place you go to lose at claw machines, not witness history. But outside there's a queue. A massive one. The kind of queue that usually means a pop idol is signing autographs or a shop is selling something wildly unhealthy and limited edition. Office workers in rumpled shirts shuffle forward like they're entering a side quest they can't back out of. Teenagers hover in that I'm definitely not excited but also I am pose. Everyone's drawn in by a strange pulsing sound leaking into the street. A steady thunk, thunk, thunk. Like a metronome designed by somebody who hates metronomes. Whatever's making that noise has captured the entire block. Step inside and there it is. A lone cabinet glowing like it's been plugged directly into the sun. Rows of pixelated aliens marching down the screen with the unearned confidence of a Saturday morning cartoon villain. Space invaders. People wait over an hour for a go. Spectators crowd behind the best player like it's the finals of an esport tournament that hasn't yet been invented. Everyone becomes an instant expert, offering tactical advice, moral support, and occasional gasps that suggest genuine emotional investment in these tiny little descending blobs. The machine swallows so many 100-yen coins that Japan reportedly has to mint more. Arcade owners start behaving like they're bidding on rare artifacts. The game doesn't just attract a crowd, it creates one. In that moment, a video game stops playing it cool. It grabs the spotlight, throws on a cape, and announces itself like a rock star who's just kicked down the stage door. Space Invaders doesn't simply arrive, it descends from above, loudly, and changes everything. Not bad for a cabinet with 3 sound effects. That moment in Tokyo felt like gaming announcing itself. Arcades were the places where it settled in, kicked off its shoes and decided to stay for a while. Messy, noisy, slightly suspicious carpets, and absolutely essential to what happened next. Real arcades weren't the sleek neon palaces films like to imagine. They were more like electrified caves full of screens all shouting for attention at the same time. Cabinets beeped, buzzed and chirped and occasionally made noises that sounded like a fax machine trying to escape its own body. Change machines rattled like they were coughing up treasure. Somewhere in the room without fail, a stool wobbled like it was held together by hope and one loose screw. But the real magic wasn't in the machines, it was in the behaviour. Arcades were the first places where gaming fandom learned how to be social. Not polite social, not tidy social, just human beings communicating through pixels, noise, and pure competitive instinct. You didn't need to know anybody to join in, you just hovered behind the cabinet, gave a little nod and congratulations, and now you were part of the group. There were unspoken rules too. If you hovered behind someone, you were next. It didn't matter how many people were there, it didn't matter who shouted first. The hover rule was sacred. If a player pulled off a miracle run, a crowd materialized instantly like pigeons spotting a dropped chip. If someone lost in a spectacularly embarrassing fashion, everybody pretended to be supportive while quietly enjoying the drama. And every arcade had that one person, the local legend who seemed to live there. They knew every Pac-Man pattern, every Gallagher trick, every high-score exploit. They didn't just play games, they held court. This was fandom before forums, before nights on Xbox Live, before the internet turned every opinion into a global argument. A room full of strangers united by the simple truth that someone, somewhere, was hogging the machine you really, really wanted to play. But arcades had one glaring flaw. You had to go to them. And sooner or later, somebody was going to look at the noise, the crowds, the queues, the sticky carpets, and think, what if I could do this all at home? Arcades taught early gamers how to gather, loudly, competitively, and usually in a room that smelled faintly of cola and overheating circuitry. But while fans were crowding around cabinets, another idea was starting to take shape. What if you could get the same thrill without leaving the house? No noise, no queues, no need to hover behind someone and pray they'd lose soon. In the early 1970s, one company in California had the same thought and decided to make it real. Atari. Their first big hit, Pong, was almost aggressively simple. 2 paddles, 1 square ball, sound effects that made your television emit noises normally associated with malfunctioning appliances. But simplicity was its superpower. Families gathered around the TV like they were watching a sporting event. Parents snatched controllers away from children under the guise of testing it. Entire evenings disappeared into a game so basic it barely needed instructions. And then came the Atari 2600, a machine that transformed gaming from a novelty into a cultural fixture. The 2600 introduced the radical idea of cartridges. Not fixed games based into the console's circuits, but individual game cartridges you could swap, share, trade, and proudly line up like a collection of tiny futuristic books. Suddenly, playgrounds turned into economics classes. I'll swap your Pitfall for Asteroids. No chance, my Asteroids actually loads on the first try. Fine, I'll throw in Yar's Revenge. Deal? And the games became legends. Space Invaders, the home version that caused the retail stampede. Adventure, the first real console world, complete with a hidden Easter egg that quietly invented the concept of developers signing their work. Centipede, Missile Command, Breakout, Pitfall. Each one anchored itself in the collective memory of living rooms everywhere. Cartridge swapping, sleepovers, game manuals being studied like sacred texts, people discussing sprites and high scores with the sort of intensity normally reserved for political debate. And crucially, this is the moment gaming stopped being a thing you encountered in public and became the thing you invested in. Your console said something about you, and your collection said even more. Atari didn't invent gaming culture, but they gave fans a home base, a private, comfortable space where games weren't something you visited, they were something you owned. And whilst Atari's golden age wouldn't last forever, that dramatic implosion is a story for a later episode, the impact was irreversible. Gaming had moved into the house, onto the carpet, beside the TV, and a whole generation now expected that entertainment to live within arm's reach. Atari didn't close the arcade era, it simply opened the living room door and let gaming walk right in. If Atari put gaming in the living room, home computers did something stranger. They put gaming right in the middle of everyday life. Bedrooms, kitchens, dining table, anywhere a power socket and a small amount of courage existed. And in Britain, that shift began with machines that looked like they'd escaped from a school science cupboard. The ZX80 was the first great leap. Launched in early 1980 by Science of Cambridge before the Sinclair name became legend, it was one of the very first UK home computers, available by mail order for under £100. You had 2 purchasing options, $99.95 for a fully assembled model, or $79.95 for a kit version, where you received a collection of parts and the unspoken challenge, go on then, prove you deserve a computer. Plenty of families embraced this, not just to save money, but because nothing in 1980 said, I am the future, quite like building your own computer on the same kitchen table where you ate beans on toast. So the ZX80 arrived in kitchens and dining rooms like a high-stakes Lego set. Wires, soldering iron, one eye on the instructions and the other eye on the smoke alarm. And when it finally sprang to life, flickering text, monochrome glow and all, it genuinely felt like you pulled off a magic trick. Because for under £100, you now had a computer sitting in your house. 5 years earlier, the smallest computers on the market were roughly the size of a suitcase. Now you built one the size of a hardback book yourself. If that didn't earn you bragging rights in the neighborhood, nothing would.
Awesome.
And yes, even those early machines had games. Primitive, flickering, occasionally alarming games, but games all the same. ZX80 owners played stripped-down versions of Invaders, basic Breakout clones, and early prototypes of Mazogs and 3D Monster Maze, hinting at a future where computers might once terrify you with a dinosaur, which is impressive considering the ZX80 sometimes panicked when you asked it to draw a line. The screen blinked constantly because the poor CPU couldn't draw graphics and think at the same time, but nobody really cared. This was computing magic on a shoestring. And then came the ZX81, the moment the home computer went mainstream. Developed by Sinclair Research, built in Dundee by Timex and launched in 1981, the ZX81 was simple, small, and ruthlessly inexpensive. It ran on just 4 silicon chips, offered 1 kilobyte of RAM, used a membrane keyboard that felt like you were typing on a crisp packet, and output video straight to the family television, whether it liked it or not. And crucially, it wasn't just mail order. It was on the high street. W.H. Smith, Boots, John Mendes. Suddenly computing was next to the stationery and the pick and mix. And Britain went absolutely mad for it. Over 1.5 million units sold, not counting the Timex branded version in America or the unofficial clones that appeared everywhere from South America to Eastern Europe. Its limitations didn't hold it back, they accelerated the culture. Memory packs, printers, expansions, and third-party add-ons appeared instantly. An entire cottage industry formed around squeezing miracles out of 1 kilobyte. And many of the teenagers coding for it would later become the backbone of the British gaming industry. It was also the machine where a certain football manager really took shape. Originally written in BASIC by a teenager for the ZX80, it took off like a rocket on the ZX81. It let players run a football club. And Britain never recovered. It sold millions of copies and evolved into the franchise that's still going today, which is not bad for a game born on a system that sometimes took offense at the concept of a decimal point. Then came the ZX Spectrum, and this really was a jump. Suddenly you weren't staring at monochrome text or wireframe hope. The Spectrum arrived with more memory, proper graphics, fully assembled, and the headline feature, colour. Now, admittedly, Sinclair's colour palette did often bleed together like somebody had tried printing a rainbow on damp tissue paper, but at the time, it felt miraculous. A machine that had gone from be careful not to breathe on it to look mum, it actually displays blue and red. It was a revelation. The Spectrum squealed its way into millions of British homes and instantly became the centre of gravity for entire friendships. Kids gathered around TVs after school, before school, and during lunch breaks if somebody lived close enough. Everyone brought tapes, and yes, for anyone under the age of 30, these were audio cassettes. Just like the mixtapes your parents made, except instead of music, they emitted a shrieking electronic whale song while the computer attempted to decode them. If the volume wasn't perfect, the Spectrum sucked. If you bumped the table, it staged a full-blown meltdown. But when a game did load, it became priceless. Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy, Night Law, Jetpack, Attic Attack, Chucky Egg, School Days, the keyboard and joystick destroying Daley Thompson's Decathlon, and the highly frustrating text adventure The Hobbit, where Gandalf disappeared at random intervals, presumably to attend to more urgent wizard business that didn't involve helping you go left. And kids didn't just play these games, they debated them, argued about them, invented cheats their friends would absolutely believe, and occasionally shared something that genuinely worked. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Americans were discovering the Commodore VIC-20, a friendly beige brick that came fully assembled because American parents decided from the start, quite sensibly, that if they wanted to solder things after work, they'd have become electricians.
Nope.
The VIC-20 wasn't a kit, but it was a revelation. Colourful, accessible, and packed with games that didn't require you to adjust audio levels with the precision of a safecracker. Whether you're in Norwich or New Jersey, the behaviour was the same. Friends crowded round a small screen, swapped tapes and cartridges, argued about whose hardware was superior, and confidently repeated cheat codes nobody could verify. But the real transformation came from something else entirely: programming. Magazines printed pages of basic code, entire games and demos, and kids typed them in line by line with a monk-like precision. One typo and the computer collapsed. Fixing it meant learning the logic behind the machine, not just how to play games, but how to make them. These home computers didn't just create players, they created tinkerers, experimenters, the first generation of bedroom coders. And those coders would go on to shape the industry for decades. Atari brought gaming into the house, but home computers brought something deeper. The realization that games weren't just consumed, they could be created, hacked, fixed, broken, shared, and reinvented. Gaming fandom didn't wait for the internet. It evolved here, in bedrooms glowing with CRT lights, surrounded by tapes, magazines, school bags, half-working joysticks, and kids who had absolutely no idea they were laying the foundations for an entire creative industry. By the mid-80s, gaming wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a culture, and increasingly, a competition. Consoles were evolving fast, and so were the loyalties that came with them. And improbably leading that charge was Nintendo, a company with deeper roots than almost anyone realized. Nintendo started life in 1889. Yeah, you heard that right, 1889. The Eiffel Tower had just opened, Sherlock Holmes had only just appeared in print, and the first pizza was being sold in New York. And Nintendo? Making gorgeous little playing cards while the rest of the world argued over whether electricity was sorcery or science. A century later, this Victorian-era business reinvented itself with such confidence you'd think mushroom-powered plumbers were the natural next step after handcrafted card decks. Enter the Nintendo Entertainment System. Compared to the temperamental charm of home computers, the NES felt effortless. Games loaded instantly, a minor miracle if you'd spent your childhood tuning tape deck volumes like a frustrated sound engineer. It had proper controllers, bright colours, and music that lodged itself in your brain for decades with no regard of your personal boundaries. And at the centre of it was Mario. Friendly, dependable, and somehow capable of carrying an entire console on his mustachioed shoulders. He wasn't edgy or rebellious, he was reassuring. A digital everyman who also happened to be very good at jumping, which is handy when a large gorilla named Donkey Kong is chucking barrels at you. Nintendo had charm, polish, and a knack for creating worlds that felt welcoming. But not everyone wanted welcoming. Enter Sega. Sega didn't share Nintendo's genteel origin story. Whilst Nintendo were perfecting elegant cards in Kyoto, Sega's early decades were far more energetic. Sega's roots began in the 1950s, supplying coin-operated amusement machines, first in Hawaii and then in Japan, primarily to US military bases. Where Nintendo's products sat politely on tables, Sega's early creations flashed, buzzed, clanged, and encouraged soldiers to part with spare change at speed. They moved from slots to electromechanical cabinets, loud, bright, slightly aggressive machines that seemed to shout, "Oi, have some fun!" So when Sega entered the console market, they didn't arrive quietly. They arrived with arcade swagger, fast hardware, loud sound, and the confidence of a company used to drawing crowds with flashing lights. When Nintendo said, "Let's go on an adventure," Sega said, "Let's break speed limits and wear sunglasses indoors." And out of that attitude came Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic didn't just run fast, he posed fast. Spikes, smirk, crossed arms, and a whole vibe of a mascot who'd absolutely call your console basic, give it a chance. And Sega's marketing embraced that energy with the subtlety of a marching band. One strapline, Sega does what Nintendo don't. It wasn't advertising, it was provocation. A line fired directly into playgrounds, school corridors, living rooms, and anywhere two children would disagree loudly enough to bother an adult. Suddenly gaming had tribes. Nintendo kids valued precision, charm, and the comforting reliability of Mario's jump arc. Sega kids valued speed, attitude, and the belief that their mascot was, unquestionably, the coolest creature ever animated on a screen. Arguments broke out everywhere. Which controller felt better? Which mascot had the superior theme tune? Which box art looked more grown up? Whose Christmas was destined to be better? Parents thought they were buying toys. What they actually bought were identities. And crucially, these identities were global. Whether you were in Manchester or Melbourne, Toronto or Tokyo, the divide was the same. Same debates, same loyalties, same playground diplomacy conducted with all the seriousness of international negotiations. This wasn't just fandom anymore, it was belonging. Mascots became icons, consoles became banners, and cartridges, those little rectangles of plastic, became symbols of who you were and what you believed, at least until the next hardware generation arrived. Nintendo and Sega didn't invent gaming passion, they simply channeled it, polished it, and pointed it straight at the heart of the mainstream. For the first time since gaming began, the key question wasn't, what games do you like? It was, so which side are you on? Before the internet turned every opinion into a global shouting match, gaming fandom had a very different set of tools. Not forums or wikis, not YouTube walkthroughs narrated by somebody called Wolfmaster420. In the late 80s and early 90s, the pillars of gaming knowledge were paper, telephones, and a suspiciously confident friend who swore blind they knew how to unlock a secret level that absolutely did not exist. This was the age of the gaming magazine. Oracle, Hype Machine, and Cultural Lifeline. If you were a gamer back then, the news didn't come to you. You hunted it. You scoured the shelves of VHS for new issues of CVG, Meme Machines, Amiga Power, Nintendo Power, Sega Power, Zap, magazines bursting with screenshots displayed like sacred relics. You memorized release dates, cheat codes, developer gossip, and entire paragraphs of reviews you would later quote at school as if you personally authored them. Print wasn't just information, it was authority. If a magazine said a game was good, it was gospel. If they savaged it, you repeated that opinion with full theatrical confidence despite never having touched the cartridge. And if they printed a cheat code, well, that was practically a spiritual experience. And then there were maps, hand-drawn diagrams of dungeons, platform levels, and entire overworlds created by artists who clearly stared at the CRT for so long they no longer blinked. Before wikis and data mining, these maps were treasure. You'd unfold a poster of a Zelda dungeon or a Sonic zone like you were examining an archaeological blueprint. But magazines were only half the ecosystem, because this era also gave us the gloriously strange invention of the gaming helpline. A real telephone number with real humans and real money draining your parents' wallet at the speed that can induce light nausea. You'd call the number and ask, I'm stuck on level 3 and I've tried everything. And on the other end, an underpaid 20-year-old would flip through a binder the size of a kitchen appliance and say, jump at the second torch, there's a hidden platform. You'd hang up gratefully. Your parents, they'd look at the phone bill and then look at you with a face like thunder.
What?
And if you couldn't afford the official and expensive helplines, you made your own. Friend networks turned into unlicensed support desks. Long landline calls where you'd swap notes like you were coordinating a military operation rather than trying to kill a pixelated skeleton. I once spent an entire summer doing exactly that. Me in one house, 2 friends in theirs, all with Eye of the Beholder running on our Amiga 500s. 3 separate playthroughs, 3 separate bedrooms, and 3 separate parents wondering why the phone was constantly engaged. We call each other daily. I'm stuck in the catacombs. Have you beaten this monster yet? No, I'm stuck behind that monster. No Discord, no guides, just landlines, graph paper, and blind optimism. But the richest, strangest part of this era wasn't the magazines or the phone lines. It was the rumors, the myths, the whispered nonsense that spread across school corridors with the confidence of urban legend. Someone always claimed their cousin had unlocked a hidden character. Someone swore they found a secret world. Someone insisted that if you pressed up, down, up, punch at midnight, the final boss would instantly explode. None of it worked, but we tried every single one, because what if this time it did? And then there were cheat books, those thick tomes sold in the same shop section as gardening manuals and road atlases, filled with codes, half-truths, and diagrams that looked like they'd been illustrated during a minor earthquake. But they were precious. In a world without search engines, without social platforms and instant tutorials, fans built knowledge with whatever they could gather. Folded magazine inserts, photocopied cheat sheets, hand-drawn level maps, notes traded on school buses, tips written in pencil on the back of exercise books, rumors repeated so many times they become canon. This era of fandom wasn't clean or accurate. It was chaotic, earnest, inventive, and powered almost entirely by imagination. Print didn't just inform gamers, it formed them. It taught players to share information, to collaborate and compare notes, to argue passionately, and to treat gaming not as a pastime but as a shared, evolving puzzle. It was the pre-internet internet, a fan network held together by paper, pencils, patience, and the unstoppable force of kids determined to finish a game without ever knowing if they were doing it correctly. Before the internet and before routers became household furniture, gaming fandom was already trying something bold, connecting players who weren't in the same room. But the very first online worlds didn't happen in bedrooms or living rooms. They happened on university servers. If you were on a campus in the late 70s or early 80s, you might have stumbled across something strange on the mainframe. MUDs, multi-user dungeons. Text-only worlds where players explored, chatted, fought monsters, annoyed wizards, and occasionally crashed the system so badly an administrator had to be summoned like IT Gandalf. These early MUDs created the first seeds of online fandom. Collaborative, argumentative, creative groups of players navigating shared worlds entirely in words. But MUDs at the time were mostly confined to universities. The revolution happened when modems arrived in ordinary homes. A plastic box with flashing lights and the noise of two fax machines arguing. You click connect and the computer would respond with a squeal, a hiss, and a burst of robotic chatter, the ritual chant that meant you were going online. Parents hated it, gamers loved it, because for the first time you could play with somebody who wasn't sitting next to you. Games like Doom, Quake, Diablo, Command & Conquer, and Descent suddenly had online mode. It barely worked. Lag meant you'd fire a rocket and could go make a sandwich and come back and maybe the explosion had finally landed. So players invented a workaround. If the internet was too slow, too unreliable, or too busy being used by your mum to make a phone call, you simply skipped the internet entirely. Welcome to the LAN party. A LAN party wasn't an event, it was a logistical operation involving a tower PC the size of a small fridge, a CRT monitor that definitely violated health and safety, a massive tangle of cables, and one friend called Darren whose network card never worked the first time.
Ridiculous.
You connect everything through a switch the size of a paperback novel, prayed the wiring didn't trip a fuse, and eventually, after 3 hours of yelling, configuring IP addresses and moving the sofa, you get one game running. Quake, StarCraft, Unreal Tournament, Age of Empires. And when it synced, the whole room cheered like they'd discovered electricity.
Yay!
LAN parties didn't just build friendships, they forged them. You haven't truly bonded with somebody until you've carried a 14-inch CRT monitor across a housing estate in the rain. But dial-up didn't just create matches, it created worlds. The online experiments of the 90s, MUDs, dial-up matches, and the early graphical realms began to evolve into something bigger. Smaller, persistent multiplayer spaces appeared, then larger ones. And suddenly an idea emerged. What if hundreds or thousands of players lived in the same world at once? In 1995, Meridian 59 hinted at the future. In 1996, the Realm Online expanded it. But the breakthrough came in 1997. With a game that needed its own dictionary, Ultima Online. It was the game that creator Richard Garriott, Lord British himself, first described as a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. The term MMORPG was born. Ultima Online was wild, ambitious, messy, and wonderful. Players built houses, ran shops, got robbed, formed guilds, went to war, griefed one another, formed friendships, swore lifelong vendettas, and invented entire in-game economies out of thin air. It wasn't smooth or very stable, but it worked. And then came the first giant. In 1999, EverQuest launched. A huge, ambitious 3D world full of people, danger, and creatures perfectly calibrated to ruin your evening. It had raids that required military precision, zones where death meant your body was miles away, guilds that rose and fell like kingdoms, message boards that turned debates into blood sport. EverQuest wasn't just a game, it was a place, The first MMO that felt truly vast, truly alive, and truly impossible to finish. And it set the stage for everything that was about to come. The MUDs had become worlds. The modems had allowed community. The LAN parties had become social lifeline. And somewhere in the background, Darren's machine still refused to connect. But players were no longer just connecting. They were belonging. Everything was ready for the next generation. Worlds bigger than anything we'd seen, powered by fans who are now trained, hungry, and socially caffeinated. By the early 2000s, online worlds weren't experiments anymore. They were established, populated, and buzzing with late-night laughter and some questionable fashion choices. The groundwork was done. Now developers were ready to ask a bigger question. What could an MMO be when you stopped worrying about possibility and started chasing ambition? In 2003, Star Wars Galaxies arrived with a proposition no MMO had ever dared. What if the draw of the game wasn't the combat, but the life? Set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, it dropped you into an era where Jedi weren't simply rare, they were legendary. Rumors, ghost stories, something the Empire had supposedly stamped out. So at launch, there were no Jedi. Not as a class, not as an option, not even as a hint. If you ever saw a lightsaber, you took a screenshot because you might never see one again. Galaxies also was unique because it wasn't about levels, it was about role. You could be a crafter, an architect, a dancer, smuggler, doctor, scout, creature handler, musician, droid engineer, an entire ecosystem of professions that made the game feel alive. Players built towns, actual towns with mayors and elections and cantinas, civic planning, that one bloke who always put his house right in front of the starport like a giant architectural insult. It was messy, ambitious, and beautifully strange. For many players, it was the first time a game didn't just tell a story, it let you live in one. Launching in the same year but occupying the opposite philosophical orbit was EVE Online. Where Galaxies offered community and craft, EVE offered chaos. Pure, elegant, player-driven chaos. EVE didn't hold your hand. It barely even acknowledged you had hands. It dumped you in deep space with a ship, a manual that read like a tax return, and a faint suspicion the tutorial was judging you. EVE wasn't built around quests or story beats. It was built around people, their ambition, their greed, their politics, their willingness to betray everyone they knew for profit. Corporations rose and fell. Alliances spanned thousands of players. Wars destroyed ships worth real-world money. And then there were the epic stories, the ones that made the actual gaming news. Like the infamous infiltration where a corporation spent 10 real-world months placing spies inside a rival organization, all to assassinate one player and blow up his ship. 10 months of deception, 10 months of spreadsheets, 10 months of false friendships, both in real life and in game. EVE didn't create MMO stories, it created MMO mythology, sagas that players still talk about decades later. Galaxies and EVE showed two radically different futures: live in a universe or try to survive in one. The next generation of MMOs was taking online gaming into some wildly unique directions. And then, in 1994, World of Warcraft launched. And it didn't just enter the MMO genre, it crash-landed at its center like a meteor. World of Warcraft wasn't an experiment. It wasn't niche, it wasn't eccentric. It was instantly playable, relentlessly polished, beautifully designed, and engineered to feel good from minute one. It made MMOs mainstream. You could log in and be having fun within minutes. Death wasn't traumatic, questing made sense, combat felt satisfying, and servers mostly stayed up for more than 20 minutes at a time. WoW became a social and gaming phenomenon. Guilds formed faster than mold in a student fridge. Raids became weekly rituals. Your first big boss kill felt like a life milestone. People booked evenings off work. People scheduled their lives around raids. People formed friendships that outlasted their time on the game itself. It was brilliant. But it came with a side effect no one saw coming. WoW's staggering success reshaped the industry overnight. Publishers looked at Galaxies, at EVE, at smaller MMOs and asked, why aren't you this and making us billions? Some adapted, some faded. EVE, to its credit, ignored the upstart entirely and continued its player-driven anarchy. And some, like Star Wars Galaxies, panicked so hard they rewrote their entire rulebook. The infamous NEG, New Game Enhancement patch, flattened Galaxy's professions, simplified its systems, and made Jedis as common as parking tickets. Everything strange, slow, emergent, and beautiful about the game was shaved away under pressure to be more like WoW. The experimental era, the one where MMOs could be weird, sprawling, unpredictable ecosystems, was ending. But the memories endured, because MMOs weren't just games. They were eras of a player's life. The guild that took you in, the friend who healed you through everything, the raid that nearly worked, the city you helped build, the ship that you lost in EVE and pretended not to be upset about, the epic nights that lasted until sunrise. These worlds weren't places you visited, they were places you lived. And for the first time in gaming history, your online identity didn't just matter, it defined you. MMO fandom became the blueprint for almost every online community that would follow. While online gaming had been growing up on PC, helped massively by the fact that PCs had modems, hard drives, keyboards, and enough storage to host a small medieval kingdom, the console world hadn't exactly been napping. Because since the Mario vs Sonic playground debates of the early 90s, consoles had been busy reinventing themselves, and their fandoms had grown louder, bigger, and far more sharply defined. Nintendo marched confidently into 3D with the N64, giving the world Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, and a controller that looked like an alien interrogation device. Sega pushed back with the Saturn and then the Dreamcast, beloved, brilliant, and doomed. Sony, meanwhile, arrived like a transfer student who'd instantly become head boy. The PlayStation didn't just sell games, it sold identity. By the early 2000s, the console lineup looked something like this. Nintendo, whimsical, inventive, occasionally baffling. Sony, who were cinematic, confident, and culturally massive. Sega were stylish, somewhat chaotic, and fading from hardware. And then also Microsoft, incoming with a console the size of a family hatchback. PCs were hosting persistent worlds, whole kingdoms full of elves and spreadsheets, but consoles were preparing for a transformation that had nothing to do with mascot wars or polygon counts. The next leap was about connection, and in 2002, everything shifted. Xbox Live launched, and overnight, console gaming entered the modern age. Voice chats, friends lists, matchmaking that didn't require typing something that looked like a nuclear code. Then Halo 2 hit and detonated the social lives of an entire generation. Online multiplayer wasn't an experiment anymore, it was the main event. Sony followed with PlayStation Network, and soon both systems had universal messaging, downloads, online multiplayer, and of course, achievements, trophies, and gamer scores. Achievements turned gaming into a polite international arms race, the Olympics of doing completely unreasonable things for digital stickers. And whilst all this was happening, something else was rising in the background. YouTube arrived in 2005, unleashing a Pandora's box of gaming clips, speedruns, glitch videos, and early Let's Plays filmed by pointing a camcorder at a CRT television. Then Twitch came along and made gaming live streams a global phenomenon. Suddenly people weren't just playing games, they were performing them, commentating on them, building careers from bedrooms equipped with nothing but a mic, a capture card, and possibly a very stressed cat. Competitive gaming had existed for decades, from the 1980s Space Invaders Championship to arcade tournaments to Korean StarCraft arenas. But this era turned it into something enormous. Fast internet plus global streaming plus sponsorship money equals stadiums full of fans watching Counter-Strike, StarCraft, Halo, League of Legends, Dota, and more. Teams formed, leagues launched, prize pools skyrocketed. Players became celebrities. It was like esports barreled into the mainstream on a flaming hoverboard doing 90 miles an hour with no adult supervision.
No way!
By the late 2000s and early 2010s, gaming wasn't geek culture anymore. It was culture. The shared language of the internet. A global campfire where millions gathered, competing, watching, arguing, creating, celebrating, and occasionally shouting lag at inanimate objects. Consoles going online didn't just expand gaming, it connected it and globalized it, turning it into one of the biggest social ecosystems on Earth. Gaming didn't evolve, it took over. So this is where we've arrived. From mainstream muds tapping away in university basements, to modems screaming their anguish across early 2000s bedrooms, to LAN parties powered by pizza, sweat and blind optimism, to MMOs that swallowed entire evenings, to consoles that connected the whole world, to esports arenas full of chanting fans, to streamers broadcasting from bedrooms to millions. Gaming fandom didn't just grow, it evolved. It became something sprawling, contradictory, messy, creative, loud, brilliant, and occasionally exhausting, just like the internet it helped build. Today, you don't have to look far to see how far fandom has come. Open Discord and you'll find guilds, clans, raid groups, modding crews, fan artists, lore theorists, spreadsheet tacticians, and at least one channel dedicated solely to posting pictures of pets next to keyboards. Visit Reddit and you'll encounter communities built around everything. The biggest AAA blockbusters, the tiniest indie games, one specific character's backstory, or an obscure farming sim where people argue passionately about carrot layouts. Watch Twitch and you'll find players turning games into theatre. Speedrunners who bend physics out of spite, VTubers with entire fictional biographies, strategy streamers who conduct battles like orchestras, and cozy creators playing Stardew Valley whilst their chat tries desperately not to set the place on fire. Scroll through YouTube and you'll find a living archive of gaming culture. Deep dives, retrospectives, lore dissections, documentaries, glitch archaeology, machinima, nostalgia reels, and people insisting they can beat Elden Ring with a steering wheel. Fandom today is everywhere, and it's many things all at once. It's wholesome, it's chaotic, it's collaborative, it's argumentative, it's generous, and occasionally it's slightly terrifying. It's full of kindness, creativity, drama, brilliance, pettiness, jokes, memes, mods, guides, theories, and people that spend hundreds of hours decorating their Animal Crossing islands despite having jobs, families, and responsibilities that definitely needed attention last week. But above all, it's alive. Gaming fandom isn't a club you join, it's a place you go, a constellation of overlapping communities, each with their own culture, norms, rituals, and chaos. And like any big community, it has its shadows. Toxicity, gatekeeping, burnout, parasocial meltdowns, review bombing, arguments that somehow escalate from "is this mechanic balanced" to "I hope your crops fail" in under 3 minutes. But even with all this turbulence, the heart of gaming fandom, the bit that kept it moving for 50 years, is still there. The creativity, the curiosity, the desire to build, share, collaborate, compete, laugh, explore, argue, improve, and sometimes fall flat on your face in front of an audience of strangers. Because the thing that has always powered this culture, from MUDs to MMOs to streaming, is simple. People love living in worlds together. That isn't going anywhere. And the future? That's already forming around us. AI-driven NPCs that act like real people, persistent universes that change in real time, VR worlds that are social ecosystems, AR games that spill out into the physical world, engine tools that let fans build entire games in their bedroom, communities that write canon-level lore, mods that resurrect games long after the publishers have forgotten them, esports teams that feel like football clubs, indie developers making global hits with teams the size of a lunch queue. We're moving towards a future where the line between game, community, creator, and audience blurs until it's impossible to see where one ends and the next begins. Where fandom isn't a reaction, it's a force. Where the worlds players inhabit are partly built by them. Where stories evolve because communities push them forward. Where games become shared spaces, shared cultures, and shared histories. And if the last 50 years have shown us anything, it's that gaming fandom doesn't sit still. It builds, it adapts, it mutates, and it grows. From a handful of players on a university mainframe to millions gathered on Twitch, to billions connected across continents, this strange, joyful, chaotic, fiercely passionate culture hasn't just survived. It's shaped the internet, it's shaped entertainment, it's shaped how we connect with each other. We don't just play anymore, we belong. And that's the story gaming fandom has been writing together, level by level, for half a century. I'm Dave from Geektown, and this has been Geekstorians. If you've enjoyed this stroll through virtual worlds, LAN parties, dial-up shrieks, and headset arguments with strangers who definitely should have not been allowed microphones, remember there's plenty more Geekstorians to explore. And while you're here, do me a tiny favour. Hit follow or subscribe on your podcast app. It helps the show reach more lovely geeks, and it reassures the almighty algorithm that Geekstorians is not, in fact, a statistical anomaly. A quick rating or review also goes a really long way. Apparently, the robots really adore that. You can find every episode of Geekstorians over at geektown.co.uk, along with news, reviews, and the latest UK TV air dates. And if you fancy even more nerdy goodness each week, check out Geektown Radio on our regular show covering TV, film, and gaming news. Thanks for listening, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.